The whispers echo through the ages, passed down to us by the Incas themselves. They say that hidden in the Sacred Valley of Peru and high up the rugged Andean mountains lies a ruin called Nalpo Iglesia. Yet the true mystery of this site lies not in its crumbling walls, but in an enigmatic door carved into a rock wall off to the side. Made from stone as hard as granite, this door's exquisite stonework and immaculately clean lines already boggle the mind. But what the ancients reveal about this door and about Napo Iglesia is even far more mind-boggling. According to legend, this secret door is no mere door. It's a secret dimensional entryway, a portal that leads to a world beyond our own. But who built this door? Who built the entire site of Napo Iglesia? What you're about to discover might change everything you thought you knew about human civilization and how we got here. Nalpo Iglesia is weird, from its strange name to its strange geology. For instance, Nalpo Iglesia means Church of the Ancients, but it's not a church. It's a mysterious rock-cut temple or shrine with a beautifully carved monolithic altar, a wall with numerous niches to the side, and the enigmatic rockway doorway we talked about earlier. Nalpo Iglesia goes by several other names. Some call it Nalpo Huaca, or Temple of the Ancients. Others call it Coquilla, which means golden moon, but some also refer to it as Temple of the Moon. The site sits in the Andean mountains in the remote highlands of Peru's Sacred Valley. However, both the purpose and the origin of this prehistoric site have managed to escape the grasp of even our finest archaeologists, despite all the attention given to it. To get to Nalpo Iglesia, you'd have to head up the bustling tourist paths that lead to Machu Picchu. As you go, you'll find a steep ravine, and then, halfway up that ravine, as you progress in your climb, you're going to find an inverted V-shaped entrance painstakingly carved into the mountainside. It is from this point on that your adventure into Nalpo Iglesia officially begins. The downward V entryway of Nalpo Iglesia beckons the wandering adventurer to come explore the cave's hidden depths. But when you walk up to this weird-looking entrance, you'll immediately find that it's been blocked off by a huge rubble of stones, preventing further exploration of what lies within. Thus, we move the tour over to one of the most mysterious aspects of this shrine, the enigmatic false door. The Andeans say that this door is a portal into another dimension. In fact, according to Andean lore, Nalpos, ancient beings who inhabit the spirit world, frequently enter in and out of our world through the door, especially at peak energy times, which happen to coincide with our twilight and dawn. We'll touch more on that a bit later, but for now, we have a bigger question to confront, which is, how on earth was this door built? Because so many things about this feature defy both archaeological and historical explanations. To begin with, the lines on this door are clean, and there's an ultra-high level of precision involved in the stonework. This is a level of precision that would have required modern tools to create, especially because of the hardness of andesite. Andesite is the name of the stone from which the secret door at Nalpo Iglesia was carved, and I can tell you for free that it is very hard. For perspective, andesite has a Mohs hardness rating of 7. In comparison, granite, which we all know to be pretty hard, only ranks between 6 and 7. So as you can see, andesite is one tough rock. Now, many people have attributed the building of Nalpo Iglesia to the Incas, but is that possible? This civilization only had access to stone and copper tools, so how would they have been able to create this level of precision from such a stone? You've got to admit that that's a tall order. But it gets even weirder, because when a team of researchers examined the door more closely using a field microscope, they discovered that the stone showed no chisel marks, which suggests that copper tools were probably not involved in carving out this door. But that isn't even all. A deeper examination of the door also revealed that its builders had melted some andesite and then spread a layer of that over the surface of the door to give something of an obsidian feel. And once again, this leads to multiple questions. If indeed that was melted andesite, then the builders would have had to use a prohibitively high amount of heat to melt the stone because, again, the stone is harder than granite. So where did they get that much heat from? How were they able to generate that much heat? For perspective, andesite is a volcanic rock made up of plagioclase feldspar and pyroxene. To melt this kind of stone, you're looking at temperatures no less than 1,000 degrees Celsius or 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you wanted to heat the stone to that point where it resembles obsidian, then you're looking at temperatures even higher than that. That's a whole lot of heat. How could the Incas, who lived in the 1200s at a point where the only available heating was wood, have generated this much heat? Or could this be our clue that we should be looking elsewhere? Perhaps much earlier than the Incas? We'll get to that, but before we do, I told you earlier that Nalpo Iglesia's secret dimensional door wasn't the only mysterious thing about this site. In fact, that door is only just the beginning. There's so much more to be puzzled by here in Napo Iglesia. The cave ceiling of Nalpo Iglesia is another point of mystery at this site. Once again, you'll see the remarkable precision involved in the effortless slicing of the ceiling, which hints at the possibility that modern machinery was involved. But then again, we're talking about an altitude of 9,800 feet, or 3,000 meters, which takes us back to how? Whatever was used to cut through this ceiling, how was it lifted all the way to that altitude? And while you chew on that, there's one more aspect of Nalpo Iglesia to explore before we start to peel back the layers to uncover the true origins of this mysterious site. I'm talking about the intricately carved altar right at the entrance to the cave. Carved entirely from bluestone, the Nalpo Iglesia altar exhibits the same exquisite stonework and clean lines as the secret dimensional door. Sure, bluestone might not be as hard as andesite, but it is quite hard as granite. So it also begs the same question of how the builders of this altar achieved such sharp, clean lines without the use of modern machinery. I mean, the right-angled niches are almost mathematically perfect, and the stonework techniques are incredibly advanced. Even the choice of bluestone seems to be a hint, which we will uncover in a bit. Plus, the altar seems carefully aligned with astronomical phenomena, with the azimuths of the three chambers of the altar all aligned with the rising of Sirius, the winter solstice, and different constellations. Whatever group built this place definitely knew what they were doing, and it shows. Nalpo Iglesia is obviously breathtaking, even though, as you'd find if you ever go exploring the site, the place seems to have been deliberately destroyed. But once again, the story of how this happened is yet another mystery. Some have attributed the destruction of the site to Spanish conquistadors from the 16th century. Others say it was destroyed by tomb raiders. From the looks of the ruins, it would appear that whoever tried to destroy Nalpo Iglesia drilled some holes into the altar at the entrance and then filled the holes with dynamite to blow up the place. But once again, the super clean drill holes made into the altar at Nalpo Iglesia lead some to the conclusion that it couldn't have been the Spanish conquistadors or treasure hunters, as neither the conquistadors nor tomb raiders had the kind of technology required to make such clean drills. So maybe the holes were deliberately drilled by whoever built Nalpo Iglesia? And what was their purpose behind creating Nalpo Iglesia? Well, there are a couple of theories, and one of them might change how we think about the birth of human civilization. Obviously, we can cross off the Incas from our list of possible builders of Nalpo Iglesia. Why? Because we have access to sites known to have come from the Inca civilization, and they look nothing like Nalpo Iglesia. The Incas lived around 1200 AD and worked with stone and copper tools, which would have produced rough, uneven surfaces, and nothing anywhere close to the sharp and clean lines we see on the false door and the altar at Nalpo Iglesia. I mean, take a look at this. This structure is attributed to the Incas. Now compare it to the secret dimensional door at Nalpo Iglesia. The quality of craftsmanship is obviously miles apart. While this structure shows the typical Inca stonework, rough and motorless bricks made from clay or adobe, and much less intricate designs, Nalpo Iglesia is the total opposite of that. The craftsmanship displayed at this site is simply unmatched by any of the Inca structures we know of. This is the reason most believe that the Incas inherited Nalpo Iglesia and then attempted to copy its stonework techniques, a sentiment shared by the ancient Aymara, cousins to the Incas. So if the Incas didn't build Nalpo Iglesia, who did? Well, one theory says it was the deity Viracocha. Viracocha is a traveling builder god in Andean mythology, and according to legend, he appeared with 7 other beings called the Shining Ones after the catastrophic famous flood that wrecked the world. Together with his Shining Ones, Viracocha helped humanity rebuild civilization, and apparently one of his many masterpieces was Nalpo Iglesia. Some other Andean cultures also mention Viracocha in their myths. But we won't be going too deeply into that, because there's another theory around Nalpo Iglesia, and it's much more complex and far more interesting. The second theory we're going to be looking at traces the origin of Nalpo Iglesia to a much older civilization. Specifically, this school of thought traces Nalpo Iglesia all the way back to Atlantis. But as I said, this theory is a bit complex, so be sure to follow closely. If you're familiar with the Atlantis theory, you probably know that this theory argues that human civilization has its roots in a much older civilization called the Mother Culture. Unfortunately, this Mother Culture got lost after a catastrophic global flood event, a tragedy for which nearly every culture has a legend. So the lost civilization theory comes out standing real strong from the get-go. Anyway, as the theory goes, many of the unexplainable megalithic structures we have today, like the pyramids or Stonehenge, are actually vestiges of this older civilization and share the same cultural history. But do we have reason to believe that Nalpo Iglesia is part of this group? Well, apparently we do. In fact, the clues were right in our faces all along. So, as I mentioned earlier, the ceiling floor of the Nalpo Iglesia cave entrance was cleaved to form 2 different angles. One is inclined at a 60-degree angle, while the other is inclined at 52 degrees. The laser-like precision of these cuts is something else, but we have already stressed that before. Here's the part that concerns us now. There's only one other place on Earth where we see these 2 angles occur side by side, and that is in the slope angles of the 2 major pyramids at Giza. So when you consider the superhuman effort put into building these 2 separate structures, and then you consider the identical details encoded into each structure thousands of miles apart, any conclusion that this might simply have been random or coincidental loses some of its defensibility. What seems more like the case is that both structures were built by the same people. or at least using a shared architectural plan. The Stonehenge connection, though, is where things get even more intense. As I already pointed out before, the altar at the front of Nalpo Iglesia was made from bluestone, and there's reason to believe that this was far from a random choice. In the first place, bluestone has excellent piezoelectric and electromagnetic properties, which is allegedly good for shamanic journeying. But more to the point though, whoever created Nalpo Iglesia made sure to choose the side of the mountain where the only outcrop of bluestone in that area exists. Now, this might sound like random trivia to you, but take a trip halfway around the world to Stonehenge in the UK, and you'll see why it isn't. If you didn't already know, the oldest stones found in Stonehenge are actually bluestones. And just like we see in Napo Iglesia, using bluestone to build Stonehenge was intentional, as the builders had to source these huge stones from over 100 miles away just to carry out their project. The builders knew precisely what they wanted, and it wasn't just stone, it was bluestone, the same bluestone that we only find in one other ruin, which is Nalpo Iglesia. So where does that leave us? Once again, we have two seemingly unrelated structures, impossible to build, separated by thousands of miles, and yet they share identical similarities that are almost too specific to just be random. But perhaps even this isn't enough for you, so let's step it up a notch. There's one more utterly bizarre similarity between Nalpo Iglesia and the pyramids that's impossible to argue away. You see, Nalpo Iglesia fits in very well with other ancient ruins, especially with its spot-on accuracy in incredibly complex astronomical mathematics. In fact, many Inca shrines are built this way. A famous one would be the Intihuatana stone at Machu Picchu, which was built to observe the sky. Considering that another name for Nalpo Iglesia is Choquequila, or Temple of the Moon, it seems to substantiate the theory that Nalpo Iglesia was built as an ancient form of an observatory, albeit a sacred one. But wait, it gets even better. Let's get to the pyramid link. Even the measurements of the secret dimensional door hold significant meaning. First off, they conform to musical notation. So the length to height ratio is 3:1. That's a perfect fifth in the second octave. Then we have the alcove with a measurement ratio of 5/6. That's a minor third. But that's by the way. More to the point, the 5:6 ratio of the alcove has super specific astronomical significance. For one, it describes the movement of the Earth to a super precise detail. So if you ask astrophysicists, they'll tell you that though the Earth's axis appears stable, our planet is actually a little wobbly. In clearer terms, the Earth's axis wobbles a little bit as the Earth rotates, just like a spinning top. And it takes the Earth's axis about 25,920 years for it to complete one circular wobble. But that's not all. The Earth's rotational axis also changes its direction slightly every 21,000 years in a process known as precession. By the way, this change causes the Sahara Desert to turn green every 21,000 years. Unfortunately, none of us are ever going to see that, so it's as good as desert forever. Anyway, more to the point, guess what happens when you put these two numbers together, 25,920 and 21,000? You get a ratio of 5:6, the exact same ratio we saw earlier. But if you're still unimpressed, well, how about this? The same ratio is encoded in yet another megalithic structure somewhere else. And can you guess where? Egypt, of course. More specifically, I'm talking about the Brent Pyramid. The slope angles of this megalithic structure encode the very same ratio as the walls of Nalpo Iglesia's secret door, just as you saw with the ceiling floor and the pyramids of Giza. So, still think it's random? Perhaps you do, but even you would concede that these clues add up. That being said, up to this point, we have explored some clues within some ancient mysterious structures that seem to hint at a possible shared origin. But to see how that fits within the Atlantis theory, we need to talk about something known as triptych architecture. So when we talk about triptych architecture, we're talking about ancient structures all over the world that feature this unmistakable three-door pattern. You can't miss it. There's the wider door in the middle, and then two taller doors flanking the wider door by the sides. Here are different cultures displaying triptych architecture. As you can see, the three-door pattern is consistent. According to legend, these three doors had a metaphysical significance. So the two doors on the right and left represent the balance that exists in nature, like yin and yang, male and female, night and day, sun and moon, life and death. The middle door, however, was supposed to be symbolic of the portal that leads us to our inner selves, or a place of higher consciousness. So, question, do we also find this triptych design at Nalpo Iglesia? Well, you tell me. Take a look at this and tell me what you see. It's the exact pattern. The middle door is wider, while the flanking doors are taller. Coincidence? And don't forget the metaphysical significance of the triptych design. The middle door is said to be a symbol of the portal that leads to the realms of higher consciousness. Now, where have you heard this before? Exactly, the secret dimensional door at Nalpo Iglesia. And that's not even where it stops, because not only do Nalpo Iglesia and all these other ancient structures share a similar architecture, but even their religious icons are strikingly identical. If you check through hundreds of ancient cultures and the iconic representation of their deities, you'll notice that they all follow a similar pattern. You have the deity as the central figure. This deity faces forward and then holds parallel objects or animals on either hand. Remember Viracocha? It's the same pattern. Deity in the middle, two parallel objects in each hand. Now look at the other divine icons from cultures all around the world. As you can see, the similarity is almost uncanny, too precise to be random. But how do we make sense of all of this? Well, that's where the lost civilization theory comes in. Here's how that goes. Around the end of the last ice age, there was a highly advanced civilization. The people lived somewhere in the Caribbean and the western coast of North Africa. At that point in human history, the Caribbean was more elevated than it is today, and the Sahara was grassy. The people of this civilization were well known for their ability to manipulate both living and non-living things to take up any unique form they wanted. So they could create earthquakes, levitate large objects, and even manipulate life forms into other life forms, sometimes even making whole human beings. Sadly, as time went on, just as it happens with most powerful civilizations, hubris stepped in, and the civilization started to take their powers too far. The people would experiment with human-animal hybrids, and this resulted in recurrent epidemics that weakened the empire. Then, around 9000 and 8000 BC, a civil war broke out between the Caribbean cities and the Sahara cities of Atlantis. The war led to earthquakes and tsunamis. It damaged the atmosphere of the Sahara, which is why it is the dry wasteland that it is today. But it also led to cataclysmic flood, perhaps the same one that all cultures seem to remember. Whatever the case, the flood was obviously disastrous, as it ended up drowning Atlantis and killing thousands in its wake. Thankfully, a few thousand managed to survive, so they migrated from Atlantis to other regions of the underdeveloped world, where they used their advanced knowledge, skills, and technology to start new civilizations. The lost civilization theory holds that the gods we hear of in ancient civilizations were actually just the surviving Atlanteans who migrated all over the world after the fall of Atlantis. Because of their immense knowledge and their possession of sophisticated technology, the local people who received them in the places where they migrated perceived and proceeded to worship the Atlanteans as gods. Also, it is said that the Atlanteans aged rather slowly and had an altered physical appearance, something they had acquired while in Atlantis as a status symbol. So this ultimately led to the non-Atlanteans representing their odd-looking guests with unique physical characteristics, human-animal hybrids, and godlike powers in their art. The lost civilization theory attempts to explain the origin of shared legends among human cultures, involving human-like gods and mystical creatures. It also explains why early civilizations had a complex understanding of astronomy, and why we see similar architecture and art patterns across the ancient world. If you think about it, the lost civilization theory has strong merits. What other theory fills in the gaps as well as this one? Remember, we've seen cultures from all around the world share very identical religious icons, and many of them never even met. Not only that, these civilizations achieved mind-numbing construction feats, quarrying and transporting megalithic stones over extremely long distances without a wheel, carving super hard rock with laser-sharp precision, and encoding super-accurate astronomical calculations many centuries before such knowledge was even known to man. If that doesn't substantiate the Atlantean theory, what else possibly could? This has to be the solution to the origin and mysteries of Nalpo Iglacsia, right? Well, maybe, but also, maybe there just isn't any mystery to the place to begin with? At least, that's what the skeptics argue. So, skeptics say that believers might be reaching a bit when they talk of traveling deities, lost civilizations, and secret dimensional doors. What if the story was a lot more mundane? For people on this side of the argument, Nalpo Iglesia is rightly attributed to the Incas, and with their existence traced to about 1200 AD, it immediately solves all of the alleged mysteries surrounding advanced craftsmanship and astronomical knowledge. Let's talk about the claims of advanced astronomical knowledge, for instance. If Nalpo Iglesia was built around the 12th century, then it tracks well. Long before then, as far back as the Sumerian civilization, humans already displayed an impressive understanding of astronomy, and contrary to the typical modern human conclusion, they didn't need advanced technology like telescopes for that. They really just needed their naked eyes and clear skies, which was what they used and had. Keep in mind that the world is very different now than it used to be. For one, the skies were a lot clearer then, and there wasn't all that light pollution that we suffer now as of that time. This means that it was much easier to read the skies then than it is now. Now, give that a couple of generations to accumulate data and observe patterns, and it's no longer unexplainable how they could have had such precise data about celestial bodies. So that answers the astronomy part. But some might object and say that this doesn't explain how the Incas cut a stone as hard as andesite to carve the secret door and the altar at Nalpo Iglesia with only stone and copper tools. The clean lines on both features and even the roof of the cave ceiling make it obvious that modern machinery must have been involved somehow. But does it really? Because as good as this objection might sound, it misses something vital, and here it is. It turns out the Incas had precisely what they needed to create such exquisite stonework, namely their stone and copper tools. They really didn't need anything else. It's surprising how many find it hard to believe, but humans have always done very impressive work when it comes to masonry, and I'm talking way before many modern tools were invented. For instance, this was carved in the 17th century. No lasers and no computer. This one is from the 16th century thereabout. Notice how the stone is made to resemble flesh, with a realistic indentation where the fingers grab the thigh. Look at the lines of the veins as well. Now, let's get a little closer to the Incas themselves. This is Chartres Cathedral from the 12th century. As you can see, the stonework at Nalpo Iglesia hardly compares to what we see at this cathedral, which puts the craftsmanship exhibited at the site in perspective. In other words, the craftsmanship of Napo Iglesia wasn't beyond the realm of possibility. But of course, this is not to take away from the impressive work done by the Incas at Nalpo Iglesia, because even though such a level of craftsmanship was possible at the time, it was still a whole lot of work. Cutting and dressing stone, especially when you're not using metal, requires a lot of labor. The masons would have had to cut the stone using copper and very hard stone tools. Then, to create the really clean lines, they would have had to use quartz sand as abrasive and keep rubbing it against the stone as the face slowly wears down. This takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But perhaps that's what made such a level of precision even possible in the first place, because smoothing the face of the stone manually with quartz sand would have reduced the risk of overcorrecting compared to if they had used high-tech machinery, as some theorists posit. Alright, so one more objection. Why go through all that effort to build such a place in a hidden location where no one can even appreciate it? Well, some have said that Nalpo Iglesia was probably a lookout point. The vantage point allowed sentries to stand and oversee the different trade routes and settlements in the region. But I don't think this explanation works, because why then did they have to carve such highly complex features? This is why I think that Nalpo Iglesia was likely built for religious purposes. If you think about it, this is the explanation that makes the most sense, accounting for the astronomical alignment and all the effort put into carving the different structures at the shrine. Perhaps Nalpo Iglesia was built as a ceremonial site for carrying out rituals related to the agricultural or astronomical cycles, which brings us to the secret dimensional door at Nalpo Iglesia. Does this door really lead to another world? Well, to be fair, string theory is willing to grant the existence of multiple universes, so let's assume that other worlds do exist. Whatever the case, the question still remains: does the mysterious door at Nalpo Iglesia lead to one of those universes? Honestly, on this one, I think it's totally up to you in what you want to believe. Skeptics might scoff and say there's no such thing as interdimensional travel. And sure, they are entitled to their opinions. But what if we're looking at it the wrong way? What if this secret door does not lead to another physical dimension, but an inner spiritual dimension that has been inside us all along, just like the TPTIC ideology teaches? New Age practitioners who frequent Nalpo Iglesia have testified to having life-changing experiences at this shrine. So maybe this was what it was all about from the start. Maybe this is why this place was built by the Incas, so that people could come here and journey into their true selves. I mean, if anybody wants to believe that, I sure wouldn't stop them, because why not? Anyway, let me know what you think about Nalpo Iglesia and all the theories we explored by leaving a comment below. Meanwhile, did you ever hear of the mountain where you can almost experience time travel? No joke, it is real. Even the comment section agrees with this. Click here to find out more about this strange mountain known as Mount Kailash.